Welcome to Boring History for Sleep, where we lull you gently into dreams through the quiet, dusty corridors of the past. Tonight, you find yourself not in a marble palace or among the halls of emperors, but in a place more pungent and far more crowded, the Roman bathhouse. But don't let the word bath fool you. There is little privacy here, little luxury, and even less relaxation for someone of your station. You are not a senator or a noble. You are not arriving at a therme in a litter, perfumed and freshly shaved. You are, like most, a sweaty plebeian lower class, a laborer perhaps. Your skin rough with dust from the forum, or your fingers stained from ink or grain. You arrive early, but not early enough. And already there's a queue winding past the outer walls. Men clutching tunics and sandals. The faint musk of oil and unwashed limbs hanging heavy in the air, even before you cross the threshold. You push open the creaking wooden door of the Mithraeum, the changing room, and immediately the warmth hits you, but not the pleasant warmth of a cozy fire. No, this is the stifling, humid breath of dozens of bodies crammed into one space, chatting, arguing, scratching, disrobing. The water in the pool is clear, but not clean. Soap is unknown here, and though the Romans use oil and astringent to scrape the dirt from their skin, much of it ends up in the water. Hair floats near the surface. Someone sneezes nearby. A child splashes water up your back. You suck in your breath as you lower yourself in, but not from cold alone. It's the filth, the closeness, it's the unrelenting press of human presence that makes this place less spa and more public swamp. The benches are slick with oil and sweat. Somewhere, a slave drops a tray of ampery. A man yells. Another laughs. The baths are the social and hygienic heart of Rome. Everyone from merchants to masons to minor magistrates comes here to soak, to sweat, to gossip, to see and be seen. The baths are Rome distilled, beautiful architecture, masking an undercurrent of chaos. You lean against the side of the pool, trying not to let your imagination dwell on what might be floating just out of sight. As the next room beckons, hotter and more crowded still. This is only the beginning. The clamor is dizzying, echoing off the bare stone walls, magnified by the vaulted ceiling. You clutch your belongings tightly, eyeing the hooks on the wall, hoping yours won't be stolen while you bathe. Theft is common here, and if you're not rich enough to bring your own slave to guard your things, you may well leave with less than you came in with. Once undressed, you make your way into the frigidarium, the cold room, stepping cautiously on wet stone that offers little grip. And yet, this is the routine, okay? If you can afford it. As you step, dripping from the frigidarium, you're greeted not with a soft towel or a gentle breeze, but with a blast of hot, thick air rolling out from the tepidarium, the warm room. A slave hands you a coarse cloth, not to dry yourself, but to wrap around your waist. Roman towels are not plush or perfumed. They're thin, functional, and often reused. It opens your pores, softens your skin, and readies your body for what comes next. The caldarium. A boy trips beside you, the clay jug he was carrying shattering on the floor. And the caldarium, the hottest chamber of all, waits for you. A furnace where your breath will become your enemy, and the sweat will pour until you feel as though your spirit, like the grime from your pores, is being stripped away. All conversation halts for a moment, a beat of silence in the overheated air before a slap lands, swift and sharp, and the noise resumes. The boy disappears into the steam. No one looks twice. You know it lies just ahead, where the air is nearly unbreathable, and every inhalation scorches your lungs. Still, you linger in the tepidarium, clinging to this liminal space, warm enough to relax the limbs, not yet hot enough to torment the mind. But the social tension never cools. Men compete here without swords, by posture, by entourage, by subtle shifts in language. The hierarchy of Rome is reinforced even when naked. The cloth clings damply to your skin as you step inside, your body already beginning to sweat anew under the rising heat. The ceiling arches high above, domed and stained with soot, and tiny windows let in narrow beams of dusty light, catching in the steam that floats like ghosts through the air. This is where the dance of hierarchy begins. The tepidarium is not just a transition space, it's a stage. Around you, clusters of men lean on benches, some lounging with false ease, others carefully postured. Their bodies glisten with oil, scraped earlier by slaves wielding strigils, curved metal tools meant to remove dirt and dead skin, though often they do more bruising than cleaning. The strigil scrapes harshly, hissing over the skin, dragging sweat and grime in greasy ribbons down one's back or legs. It's not a moment of relief. It's a scraping of self, public and painful. You glance to your left. A senator reclines with two attendants at his side. One fanning him slowly with a palm frond, another pouring warm water onto his feet. His gaze passes over you without pause. To him, you do not exist. A few feet away, a group of merchants debate the price of North African garum, the pungent fish sauce that now clings to your thoughts as the steam thickens. Overhearing is unavoidable. Secrets rarely survive these stone chambers. Rumors begin and end in the bathhouse, and what one man whispers today, another will repeat at a dinner party tomorrow. The warmth begins to settle into your bones, but it is not comforting. Your cloth towel clings heavily now, soaked with sweat and humidity. Soon, your time in this room will expire. It always does. The entrance to the caldarium is narrow like a gate into some underworld, and as you step through it, you are swallowed by heat so dense it seems to have weight. A pressure that sinks into your chest and wraps around your shoulders like a suffocating shawl. It is not just the smell of heated stone and human flesh, but of oil, thick, cloying, rancid oil that seeps from skin and drips from the strigils wielded by slaves and bathers alike. The walls reek of years of embedded grime, of bodily filth, rendered invisible by the heat. Strigils scrape against skin in every corner of the room, the metal ringing faintly as it flicks off dirt and sweat in quick, practiced strokes. The fumes hang in the air like perfume on a corpse. You reach for a jug of water and splash your neck, only to find it warmer than blood. Every pore on your body cries out. You are melting. But still, you stay, because to leave too early would draw judgment, and in Rome, appearances matter more than comfort. You see a man ass back arched like a bow as a servant drags the curved tool down his spine with brutal efficiency, leaving red welts that glistened in the half-light. It strips you, not just of dirt, but of strength, of dignity, of pretense. It brings every man, rich or poor, to the brink of his threshold, and then leaves him standing there, slick and silent, trying not to collapse. This is where Rome pretends to cleanse itself, but under the surface, the rot simmers just beneath the steam. There is no gentleness here. The goal is not pampering, but purging. The stone walls sweat alongside you, damp with condensed steam and years of use. And each breath you take is a conscious effort, drawn in cautiously to avoid the scalding bite that lurks in the mist. The water looks inviting, almost hypnotic in its stillness, but you know better. The temperature is scalding. You watch as a bather slowly lowers himself in, muscles tense, teeth clenched. Only the most seasoned can endure it without flinching. His face contorts with pain before he lets out a long, low exhale. Your bare feet slap wetly on the heated marble floor, and every step feels like walking across a giant's skillet. This is the Caldarium, the hot room, and it is not a place of ease. It's a test. The stink hits you before the sweat does. A shallow pool steamed in the center of the room, fed by heated water piped in from the furnace chamber, the prefernium, somewhere beneath your feet. You do not sit. You hover near the wall, close to one of the high, narrow windows, though it offers no relief. Round you, bodies shimmer in the heat, and every movement seems slowed, distorted. Conversations are rare here. The Caldarium is not a place for idle chatter. It is where discomfort reigns, where old wounds ache anew, where illness sometimes takes root, where the faint of heart occasionally faint in truth. A boy collapsed here last week, you were told. The heat stole his breath, and when he came to, he could no longer speak. Some men rub perfumed oil into their chests, attempting to mask the odor of rot and sweat, but it only layers one stink atop another. Caldarium is not a sanctuary. It is a crucible. Time passes strangely in the Caldarium. Minutes stretch into vague eternities, your sense of self evaporating alongside the sweat that pours from every inch of your skin. It is as if the very air conspires to erase thought. Your mind fogs. Your body weakens, and only the pounding of your heart reminds you that you are still, somehow, enduring. You press your back against a stone wall, which burns like a stove. It offers a strange comfort. Something solid, something still. You've heard it once from a corridor behind the baths. The endless crackle and roar of the fire. You are free, or perhaps merely moved along, from one discomfort to another. You stagger from the Caldarium like a man reborn and half dead, all at once. Your skin glistens, flushed and raw. Your legs feel heavy, your breath shallow. The relief is almost worse than the heat itself. Your body is beginning to cool, but your mind remains scattered, your senses dulled. The clanging of tools, the shouted orders of slaves forced to shovel fuel into the mouth of the beast that powers this inferno. The hypocaust system is genius, yes, but cruelly efficient. It does not care who bakes above it, and the heat does not distinguish between the backs of nobles and those of street sellers. Around you, figures blur in the haze, bodies shimmering like mirages in the desert, their outlines trembling with the invisible heat that rises in waves from the floor. You won't sleep well tonight. No one does after a long visit to the hottest chamber. The sweat may be gone, scraped away with oil and iron, but the heat lingers inside you, humming in your bones like a distant drum, refusing to be forgotten. You begin to understand why some call this room cursed. It's not just the discomfort, not merely the endless heat, it's the vulnerability. Your fingers tremble slightly as you grip the edge of a stone basin, breathing shallowly, each inhale rasping like sandpaper against your throat. A man near the pool slips and falls, his cry sharp and brief. No one helps him up. It is not cruelty, it is self-preservation. Everyone in the caldarium walks the razor's edge between endurance and collapse. To reach down is to risk falling with him. He recovers, slowly, and crawls to a bench where he sits hunched, dripping, shaking. You do not look again. In this space, no one is powerful. Not really. This is where illness finds its foothold, where wounds reopen in the heat, where the body's defenses melt away. Even the senators, with their armies of attendants, must sweat and suffer like the rest. The caldarium reduces everyone to their raw state. And yet, the superstition lingers more deeply than any medical reasoning. They say spirits linger here, not metaphorical ones, but real ghosts. Souls who collapse from heat stroke, or infection, or seizure, their final breath stolen in the steam, their cries unheard in the echoing roar of boiling water and scraping strigils. You feel the pressure building behind your eyes. The moisture on your skin no longer cools you. Your thoughts drift to what lies beneath this room, the roaring furnace that feeds the heat above. Finally, a slave enters and claps his hands, announcing that the hour has passed. The curse of the caldarium is not just its heat. It's what it takes from you. Clarity, strength, perhaps even memory. You might think that after surviving the caldarium, your ordeal is over, that the worst is behind you, and the rest of your visit will be an indulgent coast toward cleanliness. But in truth, you've only made it through the most obvious discomfort. But few use it properly. It's half abandoned today. Its benches lined with older men who gossip in low tones, fanning themselves with strips of linen and shaking their heads as if the world outside were madder than the heat within. You see an elderly man carried in by two slaves, his skin jaundiced, his breath wheezing. He won't emerge stronger. He's here because he always comes. Routine is more binding than wisdom. You wonder how many deaths the bathhouses quietly cause. Not by fire, not by blade, but by infection, exposure, and slow decline. You hear names, familiar and foreign, floated like leaves on water, some with reverence, others with quiet venom. Their skin glistens, their smiles are sharp, but beneath the sheen, you know what lurks. Not just parasites, but envy, schemes, petty rivalries. It's a bathhouse is Rome in miniature. Equal parts ambition and rot. Aediles, senators, even emperors, all are fair game. It's communal, of course. The strigil too. T.E. Dozens of men have used it today, and dozens will after you. You hesitate, okay? But they give back as well. A sheen of respectability, a place in the social web, a momentary illusion of control. You have to weigh the trade each day, as millions did before you. You rarely choose the bath because you want to. You choose it because it's what's expected. And Rome never forgets those who fail to play the part. You shouldn't. You have no choice. You take it, scoop the thick, gritty oil, and begin to rub it along your arms, preparing once more to scrape yourself clean of what you know would never fully leave you. Here, inside these steamy walls, men say what they would never dare in the open. A scandal begins in whispers by the basin and can reach the Palatine Hill by sundown. What awaits you now is subtler, more insidious. Despite Rome's technological triumphs, the concept of hygiene remains deeply flawed. Water is recirculated, not replaced. The stone basins and tubs are rinsed perhaps, but never truly scrubbed. That smell, that strange, sour, earthy undertone, it's not just oil and sweat, it's bacterial bloom. Everyone shares in it. You scratch the back of your neck absently. The itching started yesterday, a slight irritation. You thought little of it. Now it spreads like wildfire. Shoulders, scalp, thighs. You've heard of others with the same swarm of lice, invisible yet omnipresent, passed from towel to towel, from back to back. Because beneath the Roman bathhouse's grandeur, its marble pillars and mosaic floors, is something far less refined, a crawling, chattering, festering reality that clings not to the stone, but to the people within it. This is a world where lice thrive, disease flourishes, and gossip flows more freely than clean water. You shuffle into the next room, the laconicum, a smaller, drier, hot room meant for sweating out the final impurities. But it's not just words that pass between bathers. Disease is the true currency of the thermi. Children are most vulnerable, though the old suffer worst. In a corner, a group of younger men are laughing, pouring oil over each other's arms, and admiring their physiques in a bronze mirror. You glance at the oil jar offered by a passing slave. The baths take something each time, a layer of skin, a piece of patience, perhaps a touch of health. You've seen the marble, the mosaics, the domed ceilings, and elaborate waterworks, and perhaps for a fleeting moment you believed this place, this bathhouse, to be a wonder of civilization. But civilization in Rome is not built on ideas alone. It is built on backs, on bones, on those who serve invisibly beneath the heat and grandeur. You may not have noticed them at first. Their movements are silent. Their presence is expected, but rarely acknowledged. And yet, without them, not a single drop of heated water would run. But as ornaments, dressed in light tunics, with oiled skin and practiced silence, for the enslaved, it is a theater of endless labor, relentless obedience, and unrecorded pain. You cannot enter this place without walking through their legacy. You only have to look beyond the steam to see it. The names of the architects are preserved in stone. The engineers are remembered in history. But the names of the slaves, those who kept the fires burning, who mopped the vomit from the floors, who buried the bodies of those who never woke from the caldarium, are forgotten. You've seen them, boys with eyes hollow from sleepless nights, girls who avert their gaze at every command. They carry ointments, perfumes, cups of wine, and while the patrons recline, these slaves clean their feet, refill their basins, and take the blows when things go wrong. The Roman bath does not function on engineering alone. It runs on slavery, beneath the stone floors of the caldarium, under the marble benches of the tepidarium, in crawl spaces and fire pits. Laborers toil in suffocating darkness. These are the stoker slaves, men and boys condemned to shovel fuel into roaring furnaces that heat the hypocaust system. No one cares who hauls the amphory, who scrubs the excrement from the latrines, who carries the bodies when heat stroke claims another victim. He is maybe 14, maybe younger. His eyes do not meet yours. He disappears into a storage chamber without a word. What does he know of Rome? It's not the law, or the Senate, or the Forum. He knows the temperature of scalding water. He knows how long a man can stay unconscious before he dies. Okay? He knows which patrons strike harder when displeased. Okay? He knows how to survive. Barely. Slaves are invisible until they fail. Okay? And even then, they are quickly replaced. A boy too small to lift the water pail is whipped, not excused. An old woman, once a wet nurse, now stooped with age, limps through the peristyle with towels on her back. Achaia, she's not given a moment's rest. Rome has no useful weakness unless it's decorative. They live with soot in their lungs and burns on their hands, and they die young, often alone, often in silence. You hear the echo sometimes if you listen past the laughter and chatter above, the distant clang of iron tools, the dull roar of flame, the barked commands echoing through smoke-blackened chambers. No one asks how the water stays hot. You catch a glimpse of one young slave moving through the frigidarium, barefoot, soaked, his hands cracked from lye and lime. Some of the elite take their slaves into the baths as status symbols, not just for assistance. The bathhouse is a theater of cleanliness, but only for the free. They have touched every surface, moved every object, and yet they are everywhere. Behind every hot tile, every polished bench, every perfumed jug, their fingerprints remain. By now, your skin is raw, your muscles are aching, and the idea of rest flickers temptingly in the back of your mind. But rest is not easily found in a bathhouse, not in a place where every glance might be a judgment, every shadow a trap, and every echo a whisper meant to wound. Supposedly, these slaves are responsible for guarding the patron's possessions, but they are underpaid, overworked, and easily bribed. Physical danger lingers as well. The close quarters, the lack of clothing, the slippery floors. These all create a space where power can be asserted in cruel and sudden ways. You've seen it already. Perhaps as a man's towel is pulled away by a drunken group of equestrians, or as a senator's son mocks an older man's hunched back or misshapen foot. Laughter echoes louder in marble chambers, and shame clings harder when it's reflected in 100 polished surfaces. There's no privacy here. If you slip, if you faint, if you vomit or collapse or cry out in pain, everyone sees it. Everyone remembers. Men jostle for space near the basins, and what begins as a nudge can quickly escalate. Tempers flare, egos swell. Rome may laugh today, but it will whisper tomorrow, and the story will follow you to the market, to the theater, even to the forum. Reputation, once bruised, festers like an infected wound. If you cross the wrong man, or worse, accidentally insult one, a shove becomes a strike, and a strike, a brawl. This was meant to be a place of cleansing, of renewal. But instead, you feel more exposed than ever, stripped not just of crime, but of dignity, of security, of peace. Sometimes, a bathhouse visit ends with a broken nose, a dislocated shoulder, or worse. A few denarii slipped into the right hand will ensure a ring, an amulet, or a purse of coins disappears without trace. The vulnerability of nudity is not lost on those who seek to exploit it. Slaves, particularly the young and powerless, are often the targets, but even free men are not always safe. Rome is a society obsessed with status, not consent. And in this temple of flesh, boundaries blur dangerously. There are areas in the larger baths, dark corners, private alcoves, where silence conceals acts that should never occur. Those who scream often regret it. Theft in the bathhouse is rampant, and if something goes missing, few protest loudly. For doing so invites even greater scrutiny. Why were you carrying so much gold into the baths? Someone will ask. Who was it meant for? Another will murmur. Rumors start faster than justice can catch them, because despite its appearance of civility, despite the ritual of cleansing and the architecture of grandeur, the Roman bathhouse is a place where civility breaks down the moment you let your guard drop. Here, theft is common, assault not unheard of, and humiliation a public sport. You've perhaps noticed the attendants, young boys hovering near the apodidium, a changing area where men undress and leave their clothing and belongings behind. But theft is only one form of violation. Sexual violence also festers in the steam, whispered about but rarely acknowledged in daylight. Then comes the humiliation, a kind of theater no less cruel for its casual nature. To be shamed in the bathhouse is to be marked. So you sit, tense, watching every movement, guarding your few belongings with an anxious eye, praying you haven't offended someone more powerful than you. At last, you reach the final chamber in this long and punishing pilgrimage, the frigidarium, the cold room, a space of sharp contrast and cruel clarity. After enduring the boiling suffocation of the caldarium, the oily abrasions of the strigil, the whispers of disease and insult, and the ever-watchful eyes of both friend and predator, you now stand before a still blue basin of icy water, its surface pristine and mirror-like beneath the domed ceiling. Everyone does. Even the proudest of men take a breath before surrendering to the chill. Around you, other bathers brace themselves. Some descend slowly, grimacing with each step. Others leap in with exaggerated bravado, yelping through gritted teeth as the cold clamps down like iron bands around their lungs. There are always spectators. Some mock those who flinch. Others simply watch, quietly judging. You wrap yourself in a rough linen towel, still damp from earlier use, and attempt to reclaim some semblance of dignity. But you feel hollow, emptied, not purified, simply drained. This is the final trial of the Roman bathhouse, and for many, it is the most jarring of all. After all that, the heat, the sweat, the oil, the scraping, the communal basins and soiled benches, the whispers, the lice, the humiliation, only now are you deemed fit to walk the streets of Rome again, to don your toga, to rejoin the daily theater of status and survival. You are cleaned by the standards of a world built on spectacle and illusion. You've been sweating for hours. Your pores are wide open, your skin flushed from heat and scraping, and your muscles loose but tender. Not on your skin, but in your memory of the heat that scalded, the hands that lingered, the words you could not hear. The bathhouse has not cleansed you. It has revealed you. Naked, not just in body, but in spirit. Your body is soft clay, barely holding its shape. And yet, tradition demands that you now plunge, suddenly, fully, into water as cold as a mountain spring. There is no easing into it. The frigidarium is not about comfort. It is about control, self-denial, endurance. You stand on the ledge, your bare feet cold against the marble, and you hesitate. When you finally enter the water, it is not with grace, it is with shock. The cold hits you like a slap across the spine. Every muscle in your body tightens. You've heard of men who lingered in the frigidarium and never truly warmed again. Their joints stiffened for life, their lungs haunted by an endless cough. But exiting too soon brings its own shame, so you count to 10 in your mind. Not in loud triumph, but in desperate silence. And then, gasping, you pull yourself from the basin, trembling, teeth clenched, pretending you've conquered the experience rather than merely survived it. Your breath catches, fists clench, and your heart seems to skip before it races to catch up. It is not invigorating, it is punishment. After the sweltering heat, your body doesn't know how to react. The cold invades your joints, grips your ribs, and leaves you shivering violently before you've even submerged your shoulders. You stay in only as long as honor requires. No longer. To remain too long is to invite sickness, or worse. The air bites now, colder than before. Your skin, once flushed with heat, is now pale, raised in goose flesh. The final irony is this: you are now considered clean, okay? And yet, deep inside, you carry the grime still. Welcome to Rome. You survived the first day in the baths, but you'll have to return tomorrow, and the next day, and the next. Welcome back, dear listener, to Boring History for Sleep, where whispers of empire echo softly into your dreams. Now that we've endured the heat, the shame, and the ritual of the Roman bathhouse, it's time to enter the far more dangerous waters of Roman power. For here, even the most decorated general can find himself soaked not in warm oils, but in blood. In a Rome where ancestry meant everything, Marius had none of the old family names to bolster him. His service in the Juguntine War, a brutal colonial campaign in North Africa, earned him respect among the troops and suspicion among the elite. He was rough-spoken, unfashionable, unashamed of his origins. But when he brought down Jugurtha, though not without political treachery and clever betrayal, the people of Rome didn't care how polished he was. His later years were marked by paranoia, cruelty, and an unrelenting thirst for vengeance. In one apocryphal tale, he ordered the death of a man simply for having cleaner fingernails than him. The bathhouse, once a refuge for the political elite, had become an extension of political revenge. For the fall of the Republic, he was finally exiled from Rome, stripped of titles, forced to flee as an old man. He did not fade into quiet shame. Marius, now old, sick, and hallucinating, roamed his villa, muttering to himself, issuing edicts no one followed, seeing enemies in every flicker of torchlight. He died just 17 days after taking office for the last time, not with a sword in hand, but with fever on the brain and hatred in his heart. No, he returned through swamps and sewers in the midst of a populist uprising, and when he reclaimed the city, he repaid his humiliation with a reign of terror, not even in its most sacred spaces. Power clings to grime, and in Marius' story, the bathhouse is not a sanctuary, it's just another arena. A place where the strong cleanse themselves in the blood of the fallen. Senators were butchered in the streets, heads were displayed in the forum. Old enemies were dragged from baths and butchered in the public eye. They cared that he won, and so he became consul. Then, again, and again. What he did have, however, was something far more potent. Ambition forged by hardship, a soldier's discipline, and a hunger for reform cloaked in the armor of patriotism. His rival, Lucius Cornelius Sulla, once his subordinate, was a man of patrician birth and cold cunning. Where Marius fought with passion, Sulla plotted with calculation. And it was through Sulla that the Republic would begin its slow spiral into civil war. And so we begin the long and winding descent into the life and ruin of one of Rome's most formidable and most tragic figures, Gaius Marius. He was a man born not of patrician lineage, but of humble roots in the rustic town of Arpinum, the very same provincial backwater that would later produce Cicero. And yet, for all his triumphs, Marius was not a man at peace. He saw enemies everywhere, some real, many imagined. He waged war against the Germanic tribes, the Teutones, the Cimbri, and crushed them with brutal efficiency. In doing so, he became not just a hero of the people, but a symbol of the new Roman identity, hardened, militaristic, populist, and deeply suspicious of aristocratic control. Gaius Marius rose through the ranks, not by flattery, but by victories. In fact, Marius would be elected consul 7 times, an unprecedented feat in a republic that once prided itself on limiting power. But success, as it often does in Rome, invited danger. Yet, amidst this political chaos, Marius began to rot. Not physically, not at first, but spiritually. Yes, baths. Even here, our theme returns, for it was in these very places of cleansing that Marius sent assassins to drag out rivals. His seventh consorship was a ghost of former glory. In Rome learned nothing. The blood he spilled paved the way for Sulla's dictatorship, for Pompey, for Caesar. So tonight, as you drift beneath your blankets and imagine the marble halls of the baths cooling in the night air, remember that Rome was never clean. As the fevered breath of Gaius Marius faded into the damp corridors of his villa, the streets of Rome remained slick, not just with the waters of the Tiber, but with the blood of senators, equestrians, and scribes who had dared to stand in the path of vengeance. He possessed the cold gaze of a man who never forgot a slight, never forgave a rival, and never left a debt unpaid. While Marius had fought with passion, Sulla preferred patience. No foreign enemy, no external threat, just citizen soldiers under arms, entering the sacred Mithraeum, the boundary no general was ever supposed to cross. The Senate panicked. The city fell into chaos, and Marius fled into exile once again, this time an old man with enemies behind every door. These were the prescriptions, an innovation of cruelty, public lists of men marked for death, their property seized, their families exiled or enslaved. Hey, it was bureaucracy weaponized, and it began with names posted in the forum, sometimes near the baths, so that even those going to cleanse themselves might pause to see if death awaited them. And then, in a move as theatrical as it was calculated, he resigned. Sulla had proven that with enough legions and enough ruthlessness, even the sacred republic could be bent into submission. He had taught a lesson that men like Pompey and Caesar would learn well, that the true path to power was no longer the Senate, but the sword. He retired to his villa in Campania, boasting that no man would dare challenge him. He would die of liver failure, likely brought on by years of drinking, disease, and untreated syphilitic infection, his body covered in sores, bleeding ulcers, and reeking of corruption, both literal and symbolic, while Marius inspired crowds with rough speeches and soldierly grit. Sulla undermined institutions with soft words and chilling precision. And in the Caldarium and Frigidarium, men avoided eye contact, for fear that knowing the wrong person meant sharing their fate. While he battled in the east, Marius returned for one final bloody gasp, retaking Rome with his ally Cinna and bathing it in vengeance. But Marius would die soon after, consumed by illness and madness, leaving the city in the trembling hands of demagogues. But as a quiet house where old wounds fester and no one speaks above a whisper, the Republic, once the envy of the ancient world, now trembled in its own baths, waiting for the next footstep in the corridor, the next name on the list. Rome had witnessed a political purging, a grotesque cleansing that made the rituals of the bathhouse seem like a child's play. But where one man's tyranny ends, another's often begins, and in this case, that man was Lucius Cornelius Sulla. Sulla was everything Marius was not. Born into the old patrician bloodlines, educated in the classics, fluent in Greek, schooled in the subtle art of Roman politics. His early rise through the ranks was steady, though overshadowed by the larger-than-life presence of Marius. Yet Sulla waited, watched, plotted, and when the chance came, when the Senate appointed him to lead the war against Mithridates, king of Pontus, he seized it with both hands. But Marius, ever hungry for one last taste of power, managed to have the command reassigned to himself through backroom deals and mob intimidation. It was a provocation that Sulla would never forgive, in an act that shocked the very core of Roman tradition. Sulla did the unthinkable. He marched his legions on Rome itself. Sulla, having broken one taboo, would break many more. But first, he left, departing eastward to fight Mithridates, leaving Rome in an uneasy calm. When Sulla returned, victorious from the east and hardened by years of war, he brought with him a vision of order, but one written in lists and settled by swords. Friends turned on each other. Slaves betrayed masters. Neighbors whispered. Sulla's dictatorship was brief, but absolute. He rewrote laws, weakened the power of the popular assemblies, strengthened the Senate. And what did Rome inherit? A fragile peace held together not by trust, but by fear. So as you lie back now, listening in stillness, imagine Rome not as a marble city gleaming in the sun. Sleep, perhaps, is the only peace Rome could not take away. As the ashes of Sulla's dictatorship settled across the weary stones of Rome, a new figure emerged from those ruins, young, charismatic, and already wrapped in the glow of military victory. His name was Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, but to history and his admirers, he would forever be known as Pompey the Great. His father, Pompeius Strabo, had risen to prominence through ruthless tactics, and the younger Pompey inherited both his legions and his calculating temperament. His campaigns in Sicily, Africa, and Spain earned him glory. Craved recognition, statues, honors, appointments, but found that the traditional ruling class treated him as an upstart. But behind the scenes, he was a man cornered by pride and a deep sense of isolation. His political alliances were fragile at best. It was a pact not born of friendship, but necessity, but time and ambition, as ever, eroded the pact. Julius' sudden death severed the familial bond. Crassus' disastrous campaign in Parthia ended with his death and the gruesome desecration of his corpse, his head used as a prop in a foreign theater. And with the triumvirate broken, the fragile peace shattered. Each man had what the others lacked. Pompey had military glory, Crassus had money, and Caesar had the ability to sway the masses. But on a foreign beach, betrayed, butchered, and forgotten by those who once hailed him as the savior of Rome. But the choice came too late. Caesar, already in Gaul, was building his own legend, and legions loyal to him alone. But the steam that rose from the Caldera now seemed darker, like the fog of forgotten ambitions. In those tiled chambers where old men once discussed politics in hushed tones, Pompey's name faded into echo. The water washed him away when the Senate, under Pompey's influence, demanded Caesar disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. The die was cast. The Senate refused to ratify many of his eastern settlements. His veterans were denied promised land. Rome's elite saw his military popularity as a threat to their authority. But politics in Alexandria were treacherous, and Pompey, now a liability to both sides, stabbed to death as he stepped off his ship. Betrayed not by enemies, but by supposed allies, his severed head was presented to Caesar as a gift. Caesar wept, whether in genuine sorrow or calculated performance, no one can say. And so he turned to the unlikeliest of allies, Julius Caesar, a cunning populist with his own hunger for power. He had expected a slow political chess game. Instead, he found himself in a war he was no longer prepared to win. The decisive confrontation came at Pharsalus in 48 BCE, and it was Caesar who emerged victorious. Pompey's armies were routed, and the great general, once the face of Roman power, was forced to flee, humiliated and broken. The patricians whispered behind closed doors. The optimates watched him warily, and in the baths, as senators sat in quiet tension among the marble columns, Pompey's name was spoken only in murmurs, either with awe or unease. He crushed pirates in the Mediterranean in record time, a feat that brought an end to decades of lawlessness on the seas, and his eastern conquests against Mithridates of Pontus and in the reorganization of Asia Minor expanded Roman influence more effectively than any before him. As a young man, he threw in his lot with Sulla during the civil wars, and it was a wise gamble. With Sulla victorious, Pompey earned titles and triumphs at an age when most Roman senators were still serving their first military assignments. He demanded and received a triumph before he had even held public office, a break from tradition that scandalized the Senate and delighted the people. And yet, behind the marble busts and triumphal arches, Pompey's life was not a tale of serene greatness, but one of ceaseless ambition, bitter rivalries, and a slow, painful fall from favor, a descent more tragic than epic. Pompey was not born into Rome's oldest aristocracy, but his family was wealthy and politically connected. He was handsome, popular, and, at least for a time, lucky. But Pompey's success was a double-edged sword. Each victory added to his stature, but also deepened the suspicions of the Senate and rival factions. In public, Pompey played the role of the noble Roman general. Together with Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome, they formed the first triumvirate, an unofficial alliance that would dominate Roman politics. For a time, it worked. Pompey married Caesar's daughter, Julia. The balance held. Pompey drifted back toward the Senate, styling himself as the defender of the Republic against Caesar's growing power. As Caesar crossed the Rubicon, Pompey fled Rome, not to fight, but to regroup. He sought refuge in Egypt, where he hoped old alliances might offer protection. Thus ended Pompey the Great, not in triumph, not in marble halls. And so the baths of Rome grew quieter. One less rival to whisper about, one less general to watch. Welcome now into the dimly lit corridors of history, where power condenses like steam on marble, and ambition echoes like dripping water through the vaults of Rome. We turn to the most famous of them all, Gaius Julius Caesar, a man whose very name would outlast republics, emperors, and entire civilizations. His youth was marked by strategic charm, social daring, and a relentless instinct to climb. He mastered rhetoric like a gladiator masters the sword, with sharpness, flair, and deadly intent. He borrowed heavily, forming debts not just in coin, but in loyalty, favor, and expectation. So, he crossed the Rubicon, a symbolic act of rebellion that would echo for millennia. Caesar moved quickly, defeating Pompey's forces at Pharsalus, then proceeding to Egypt, where he met Cleopatra and became entangled not just in a romance, but in a dynastic labyrinth of power that suited his ambitions. The baths of Alexandria, more decadent than those of Rome, became a fitting stage for the continuation of his transformation from general to monarch in all but name. Caesar entered the theater of Pompey, not suspecting that men he considered friends, men whose names he had elevated, would strike. Brutus, Cassius, Decimus. The daggers fell not in a single blow, but in waves, 23 in all. Each wound symbolic, thrust an act of political theater as much as violence. Imagine the scent of crushed herbs, the sting of hot stone under bare feet, the hush of whispered conspiracy behind mosaicked walls. Caesar's tale is not just one of war and politics, but of calculated ritual, of slow erosion, not sudden collapse. Caesar fell at the feet of Pompey's statue, bleeding onto the tiles of a building named for his dead rival, Alia Iacta Est. He is said to have muttered, "The die is cast." Had liberty been saved? Or had chaos merely changed its mask? He wore purple robes, sat on a gilded chair, and minted coins bearing his own face. He restructured the calendar, granted citizenships, filled the Senate with men loyal to him, diluting the power of the old patricians. And though he claimed to be restoring the Republic, the steam rising from the Senate's marble walls concealed whispers of monarchy, of kingship, of betrayal, and with that single, deliberate motion, the Roman Republic's death knell began to ring. Old men muttered behind pillars, their bodies greased in oil, wondering if the Republic had already died and they had simply not yet mourned it. And in the steamy halls of the Thermae, his name began to circulate, spoken cautiously at first, then with growing admiration, and finally the fearful recognition he could be the one. And yet, in the shadowy heat of the bathhouses, where Rome's elite whispered with olive oil-slicked bodies, he was not just seen, he was felt, a gust in every conversation, a presence in every vote, not by proclaiming himself king, but by making that title irrelevant. His name would become Caesar, a title in itself, echoing down through emperors, czars, and kaisers. But it all began in the Senate, in the baths, in the steam of ambition. And as the balance of power shifted, he joined the first triumvirate with Pompey and Crassus, positioning himself as the humble consul. Even as he calculated the destruction of the old order from within cautious eyes, Caesar's rise was viewed not with awe, but with dread. Born into the patrician Iuli clan, but not into wealth or immediate influence, Caesar entered the world of Roman politics as an underdog. Caesar aligned himself with the people, bypassing senatorial snobbery through theatrical oratory, feasts, games, and public reforms. His years in Gaul were nothing short of legendary, not just for conquest, but for propaganda. He wrote his own dispatches, framing every bloodied campaign, every brutal siege, every desperate winter crossing as a triumph of Roman genius and Caesar's indomitable will, while senators soaked in heated pools discussing the moral decline of the Republic. Caesar's legions were carving out an empire, and his words were filling their scrolls. When the Senate demanded he disband his army and return as a private citizen, Caesar knew what lay ahead: trial, disgrace, and political death. Rome was plunged into civil war. Returning to Rome, Caesar became dictator perpetual, dictator for life. The bathhouses, once echo chambers of Republican tradition, now seethed with tension. Then came the Ides of March, 44 BCE. The baths ran hot that evening, and for days afterward, no man knew what future he stepped into when entering the Frigidarium. In the end, Caesar achieved what no Roman had before him. He ended the Republic. So now, dear listener, rest your head and breathe in deeply. As your thoughts grow heavy, picture him, robed in imperial purple, face bathed in steam, staring into the mirror of history. Knowing full well what he had built could not survive him, for yet, in a way, it did. Welcome now to the fog-laden fringes of the Roman Empire, far from the marble opulence of Rome, beyond the olive groves of Italia and the sunlit villas of the Mediterranean, here in the damp and windswept wilderness of Britannia. The echo of Roman civilization clung to the landscape like mist to moss-covered stones, and nestled within these lands, scattered like forgotten bones beneath soil and sod, lay some of the most mysterious ruins of Roman ambition, the lost bathhouses of Roman Britain. These were not the grand thermae of Caracalla or Diocletian, whose soaring domes and intricate mosaics were marvels of engineering and excess. No, the bathhouses of Britain were smaller, more modest, and often located in frontier forts, provincial towns, and lonely villas surrounded by sheep-dotted fields and sodden moorland. The hypocaust system was still visible, stone stacks over which hot air once flowed. Here, legionaries once scrubbed away the grime of military life, their bodies slick with olive oil scraped clean by strigils. The air would have been thick with conversation about women, cays, games, and distant family, as Latin mixed with the Celtic tongues of local recruits and auxiliary soldiers. And so, when legions marched northward through what is now Kent and Yorkshire, they brought with them not just weapons and roads, but aqueducts, hippocausts, and a sacred rhythm of caldarium, tepidarium, frigidarium. The bath complex there was monumental, complete with vaulted ceilings, imported marble, and a fusion of Roman and local Celtic deities. Sulis Minerva was worshipped at the temple nearby. A goddess of wisdom heard the splash of water into a bronze basin, filled the hiss of air against hot stone. Imagine the flickering oil lamps casting shadows on lime-plastered walls, canned voices, some gruff, some laughing, echoing in a language long vanished in a structure half swallowed by earth and time. In healing, whose cursed tablets, scratched onto lead sheets and thrown into the spring, still speak with eerie clarity. To the goddess Sulis, I curse the person who stole my cloak and bathing tunic. ... May they never sleep or find peace. These voices, plaintive, angry, petty, give us not just history, but humanity. Some collapsed under the weight of damp weather and neglect. Between conqueror and native, between comfort and hardship, between Rome's civilizing mission and the ever-rebellious soil of the north. They were built in places where roads barely held, where the fog crept in like a living thing, and where resistance simmered just beneath the surface. And yet, for a time, the baths remained, steaming sanctuaries where body and spirit were both cleansed in ritual and repetition. Others were deliberately dismantled as the empire withdrew and chaos returned to the Isle. Over centuries, they were buried under farmland, forest, and the quiet churn of time. What remains now are fragments, tesserae of mosaics depicting sea creatures, half-buried furnaces still black with soot, lead piping that once carried hot water from fires that burned day and night. Even in the far reaches of Britannia, where winters bit hard and the rain never ceased. The Romans insisted that the proper way to end a day of conquest was to strip, sweat, and immerse oneself in a structure warmed by carefully channeled fire. Yet, in their very existence, these heated stone rooms, filled with steam and ritual, told a story not only of Roman expansion, but of cultural conquest, a soft power brought by boiling water and daily routine. Bathing, to the Romans, was far more than hygiene. It was civilization itself. But these bathhouses did not always survive intact. Many were built hastily of timber and tile, later replaced by stone, only if the settlement proved worthy. At Vindolanda, a Roman fort near Hadrian's Wall, archaeologists uncovered a remarkably intact bathhouse beneath layers of peat and centuries of rain-soaked sediment. In Bath, known in Roman times as Aquae Sulis, an entire city grew around sacred hot springs. The bathhouses of Roman Britain were not places of decadence. They were places of negotiation. As you drift now into stillness, picture the warm silence of those stone chambers. Though lost, though buried, they are not forgotten. Let us now travel southward, away from the mists and moss of Britannia and into the sun-soaked ruins of a once thriving Roman city, now frozen in a final, fatal breath. The streets of Pompeii, buried for nearly 2,000 years beneath volcanic ash, offer a time capsule so eerily preserved that to walk its paving stones is to stumble directly into the daily heartbeat of an ancient world. Unlike the chaotic elegance of Rome's larger thermae, these baths were intimate yet sophisticated, wrapped around a central palestra or open courtyard. There remains a mystery that still haunts archaeologists and historians alike. Why were so many people inside the baths when Vesuvius erupted on that fateful August day in 79 CE? These were not leisurely bathers, caught unaware in a sudden disaster. They appeared to have sought refuge here, believing perhaps that the thick stone walls and subterranean chambers might protect them from falling ash and debris. Others wonder if the attendants stayed at their posts, trying to maintain normalcy until the very end, heating water, sweeping floors, issuing oils and towels as the sky darkened and rumbled with doom. In the women's section, frescoes depict cherubs and marine scenes, their innocent faces now cracked by time and fire. Did mothers huddle beneath them, shielding children, hoping the marble and brick would hold? They've offered perfume bottles, still scented faintly with oil, graffiti scrawled onto plaster walls by bathers waiting their turn, insults, poetry, even love confessions, tiles worn smooth by bare feet, drain covers engraved with initials. A full map of daily Roman life, entombed in silence, now whispering again. It suggests something poignant and unsettling, that even in their final moments, the citizens of Pompeii turned to the familiar rhythm of Roman comfort. Picture the marble benches, the echo of sandals slapping against wet tile. It's a soft conversation of strangers who shared no more than a moment of warmth and rest before returning to their lives. Hear the last sighs of Pompeii, not as screams, but as quiet conversations halted mid-sentence. Life, it seems, was proceeding as usual. No sign of hurried evacuation. No evidence of widespread panic. Superheated pyroclastic flows incinerated the city from within. The Stabian baths, with their brilliant engineering, may have prolonged life for some, but it could not save anyone. And yet, because of that very preservation, it has granted us a lens more intimate than any scroll or inscription. It was as if the bathhouse offered not only bodily cleansing, but spiritual denial, a belief that as long as the rituals continued, the world outside could not possibly collapse. The bathhouse, normally a sanctuary of life's order, became a final chamber of confusion and death, where citizens once exercised and socialized before entering the series of ritual chambers, the cold frigidarium, the warm tepidarium, and the steaming caldarium. Each chamber was a precisely engineered experience, with heated floors powered by hippocausts, copper water tanks controlled by skilled attendants, and walls adorned with mythological frescoes that reflected not only beauty but encoded beliefs. And among the best preserved structures that survive in this ghost city are its bathhouses, specifically the Stabian baths, whose silent corridors still carry the whispers of mystery, ritual, and sudden death. Built in the 2nd century BCE and later expanded and adorned. The Stabian baths were the oldest and grandest of Pompeii's bathing complexes. And yet, while the architectural genius of the Stabian baths is admired, we know from excavations that bodies were found in unusual positions within the bath complex. Some crouched in corners, others sprawled across the benches, or even collapsed in the changing rooms. Some historians speculate that the heat from the hypocaust systems might have made the enclosed spaces unbearable once ash and gases began to seep in. More unsettling still are the traces of daily objects found undisturbed. Wooden combs, bronze strigils, sandals, still resting beside the benches. But collapse it did. Vesuvius did not simply blanket Pompeii in ash. It poured fury and fire into every crevice. In the years since its rediscovery, the Stabian baths have revealed more than architecture. So close your eyes now and imagine the heat rising from the stone floor. The mystery of the Stabian baths is not merely how people died, it is how completely they lived, even at the very edge of annihilation. As the steam of Rome's structured rituals fades into silence, we now turn our attention eastward, beyond the Aegean, beyond the familiar temples of Greece, to the mysterious highlands and valleys of Anatolia, a land known today as Turkey, but in antiquity, a crossroads of civilizations and beliefs. In these lands, water was never just water. While modern visitors today soak in the thermal pools for leisure, ancient pilgrims once traveled here in search of healing, revelation, and communion with the divine. Unlike the Roman baths with their rigid architecture and communal banter, the sacred springs of Anatolia were often hidden, quiet, shrouded in mystery. In Pergamon, the Asclepion was not just a hospital. It was a place of sacred sleep and ritual cleansing. Pilgrims would arrive sick, undergo weeks of bathing, diet, and dreaming, and then emerge, if not cured, then spiritually realigned. The baths here were not only hygienic, but initiation chambers, echoing with whispered prayers, dream interpreters, and the slow dripping of sanctified water over stone. The Phrygians, too, worshipped river deities and mountain nymphs, offering songs and sacrifices beside warm streams. Inscriptions record thank yous to the divine after miraculous recoveries. And yet, for every cured pilgrim, there are signs of those who were not healed, who were instead buried with their names etched into stone around you. Ancient columns half buried in earth. Above you, stars hidden behind a veil of rising mist. You reach down, and the water is warm, unnaturally so, not just from the earth, but from the presence of something older than empire, older than language, something watching, waiting, listening, perhaps believing that they would find peace in the afterlife through the rituals of water they practiced in life, in underground sanctuaries such as Yarmberga's cave. Evidence of ritual bathing, cultic meals, symbolic ablutions stretch back to prehistoric times, suggesting that the concept of purification through water is perhaps one of the oldest in human memory. In places like Kazan and Aphrodisias, water still runs over Roman tile and under Greek inscriptions. The remains of once sacred baths now host tourists, but beneath every ripple lies a past thick with meaning, of gods placated, of souls seeking renewal, of the thin veil between the seen and the unseen. At the very heart of the city was the Plutonian, a sacred cave from which poisonous gases emerged, a literal gate to the underworld. Only the priests of Plauton could approach its depths without dying, leading animals into the cave to prove the deadly force of the god's breath. Just nearby, warm mineral water flowed into pools where supplicants bathed, prayed, and made offerings, hoping to cleanse themselves not just of disease, but of spiritual impurity. Hot springs that bubbled from beneath volcanic rocks were believed to be direct connections to the underworld, to the breath of chthonic deities, and to the lifeblood of earth itself. The ancient Anatolians didn't build bathhouses as the Romans did. They built temples around water, caves lined with altars, and rock-carved sanctuaries where the steam itself was the language of worship. Here, long before the aqueducts of Rome or the domed elegance of Byzantine baths, Ancient peoples gathered at thermal springs and subterranean sanctuaries, not to cleanse their bodies, but to commune with gods. For in this land, bathing was not a civic duty, it was a sacred rite. Anatolia has always been a place of deep mystery, a meeting point of Indo-European languages, Tyche kings, Phrygian cults, and Greek colonists. One of the most enigmatic sites lies in Hierapolis, near the famed White Terraces of Pamukam. Bathing here was not for pleasure. It was a transaction, exchange of vulnerability for favor. There were also healing cults, most famously those associated with Asclepius, the god of medicine. Archaeologists have uncovered votive offerings in the shape of limbs and organs, terracotta feet, hands, livers, all dedicated to the gods in hopes of healing. Today, the warm springs still bubble up through ancient channels in Anatolia. So now, as you lie still, eyes closed and breath slowed, imagine standing in the vapor of a sacred spring in Anatolia. Baths were never just buildings, they were thresholds. Now we arrive at the grand climax of imperial bathing culture, a place once hailed as the most magnificent bathing complex ever built. A monument to power, indulgence, and sophisticated engineering. And yet, today, it lies in crumbling silence, half lost beneath weeds and shattered marble. This is the story of the Baths of Caracalla, not merely a bathhouse, but a forgotten spa palace of the gods. Caracalla, infamous for murdering his own brother Geta and for initiating purges that left thousands dead, tried to wash away his legacy in stone and water. He wanted to be remembered not for blood, but for magnificence. Soldiers, fresh from the frontier, soaked aching limbs and whispered about campaigns, despite his efforts to rewrite his image with stone and steam. History remembers his bathhouse as the crown of an era soon to decline. Less than 2 centuries later, Rome would be fractured by invasions, its aqueducts severed, and the baths abandoned to grass and goats. And yes, in private alcoves, politics, seduction, and bribery unfolded in the flicker of oil lamps. Caracalla had created a place where all layers of Roman life intersected. Plebeians bathed beside senators. Freedmen mingled with patricians, and the invisible theater of empire played out through the rituals of water. And so, he built the baths not merely as a civic gift, but as propaganda, a monument meant to immortalize him not as a tyrant, but as a provider of pleasure, rest, and Roman greatness, where emperors soaked away their guilt gladiators, nursed their wounds, and the whispers of tyranny echoed through steam and silence. Vandals and Ostrogoths stripped them of bronze fixtures, marble sheathing, and art. Earthquakes shattered the domes. Today, visitors walk among towering ruins, their scale still breathtaking, their silence profound. The marble has vanished, but the spirit of Rome lingers in the shadows. Beneath their feet, archaeologists have found tunnels, mosaic fragments, tools, even graffiti scrawled by the workers who once maintained the infernal heat below. Commissioned by the Emperor Caracalla in 212 CE and completed around 216. This complex was one of the most colossal building projects of its time. Let us linger in the paradox. A place built by a tyrant for the comfort of the people, a sanctuary of steam designed to mask a trail of blood, Akkadian, and the ghost of a Caldarium, now open to the stars. The shadows lengthen. The empire has fallen, but the bath, the dream of it, remains. The water has long dried up, but the heat of history still radiates from the stones. It stretched across more than 25 hectares in Rome and could accommodate over 1,600 bathers at once, with towering vaulted ceilings, colossal statues, mosaic floors depicting mythic sea creatures, and walls of colored marble, the Thermae Antoninian, as it was formerly known. Water was supplied through a dedicated branch of the Aqua Marcia aqueduct. The hypocaust heating system used hundreds of slaves working tirelessly in furnaces below to maintain perfect temperatures in the Caldarium, Tepidarium, and Frigidarium. There were libraries, gymnasiums, gardens, art galleries, lecture halls. The baths were more like a spa city than a mere bathhouse. It was not just a bathhouse, it was a symbol of Rome's glory and excess at its zenith. But behind the grandeur lay a shadowed truth, for the man who built it was one of Rome's most controversial and violent rulers. The structure itself was a marvel of Roman engineering, but what happened inside was not just physical cleansing. Philosophers held quiet debates in the shade of colonnades. Poets recited verses while reclined on marble benches. Yet the irony remains that Caracalla, who hoped to be remembered for this monumental generosity, would be remembered most for blood. By the 6th century, the baths were no longer functioning, and so, as we imagine the fading of light over the ruins of Caracalla Spa, now breathe slowly, deeply. Picture yourself walking through the echoing ruins, past the shattered statue bases. As we leave behind the steam and whispers of Caracalla's great Thermae, our focus now shifts from the communal to the elite, from the masses who toiled and bathed together, to those few who ruled over them from marble-clad estates and cushioned curule chairs. He would rise at dawn, attended by dozens of slaves, each with a specific task. One to bathe his face in scented water, another to anoint him with oils from Hispania, another still to select his tunic and toga, an outfit that could take multiple hands and many minutes to arrange properly. Reclining on couches in his triclinium, surrounded by murals of Bacchus and Venus, the senator would host poets, cagers, foreign dignitaries, and philosophers. Dishes arrived in courses: stuffed dormice, honey-glazed peacock, garum-drenched vegetables, and fruit perfumed with rosewater. Behind the polished marble facades, there were affairs, rivalries, hidden debts, and fragile alliances. Power in Rome was a feast, brilliant and abundant, yes, but always on the verge of spoiling. Silver and gold tableware gleamed beneath oil lamps. Entertainment might include lute players, dancers, or even readings from Virgil or new plays recited by enslaved actors. The toga was not casual wear. It was an announcement, a fabric of symbolism. Many senators owned multiple villas across the empire, seaside retreats and Baie country estates in Latium, and vast properties worked by hundreds of enslaved people. These estates were not only sources of income, but a symbolic prestige. A bronze strigil is drawn slowly down your back. A slave murmurs something in Greek. You hear laughter from the triclinium and the soft ripple of water from the impluvium. You are a Roman senator, living not only among luxury, but becoming it. A senator without land was suspect. A senator without show was invisible. The wider the purple stripe, the closer he stood to imperial favor. Even before breakfast, the senator had begun performing his role in Rome's layered social drama. The Roman senator was not merely a political figure. He was the embodiment of Roman dignity, wealth, and public performance. But his daily life, far from the chaos of the forum or the spectacle of the arena, is defined by a steady rhythm of indulgence, power displays, and ceremonial leisure that rivaled even the emperors themselves. Welcome now to the world of elite Roman luxury, where baths were but a single note in a grand symphony of excess. To wake as a Roman senator was to awaken into ritual, not frantic labor or uncertainty, but curated routine. After dressing, the senator would proceed to the atrium, the heart of his domus, where clients, dozens, sometimes hundreds, awaited their patron. These morning greetings, or salutatio, were less about conversation than presence. Visibility was everything in elite Roman society. Presence equaled power. What the senator as midday was reserved for something more sensual, the bath and banquet cycle that defined elite leisure. Unlike the crowded, noisy experience of the common bathhouse, the elite Roman might have a private bath suite within his villa, complete with its own caldarium, tepidarium, and even slaves to pour oils, scrape the skin with strigils, and massage sore muscles. These were not just places to cleanse, but to strategize, flirt, gossip, and form alliances. It was a public ritual of power, where the senator demonstrated influence by being seen as sought after, and his clients, often freedmen, minor officials, or ambitious young men, gained political proximity by aligning with his household. After the greeting, many would follow him as an entourage to the forum, a subtle performance of his social gravity. From there, the senator might preside over court cases, debate policy, or simply be seen. And then, the cena, the evening banquet, a sacred event of display. Yet, beneath all this splendor, there was constant tension, a pressure to maintain appearances, to uphold gravitas, to not slip in favor or fortune. And while the Roman elite prided themselves on their links to the mos maiorum, the ancestral customs of austerity and virtue, their real lives often stood in contradiction. Now, as you drift deeper into rest, imagine reclining in a marble atrium as warm air drifts through colonnades, the scent of crushed myrtle and spiced wine in the air. Now, let us step away from the marble corridors of male privilege and into a world equally powerful, yet shrouded in silence, ritual, and divine tension. The cloistered life of Rome's most sacred women, the Vestal Virgins, were unlike any other figures in the Roman world, neither wives nor mothers, neither slaves nor fully independent. They walked the line between mortal and divine, serving as living vessels of Rome's eternal flame. Their days were marked not by indulgence, but by discipline, sacred duty, and isolation. And yet, They held a status and protection far beyond what any ordinary Roman woman, or even many men, could dream of. Welcome to a day in the life of a Vestal virgin. A Vestal was forbidden from marriage or sexual contact during her 30-year service. They rode in carriages, attended banquets, and had seats of honor at the games. Olive trees sway in the morning breeze. The soft clink of bronze ritual tools echoes through the portico. Cue past marble statues of your predecessors, their faces worn smooth with time. You are not a woman. You are a flame, sacred, watched, burdened, yet somehow eternally still. Even emperors bowed to their presence. Their funerals were state affairs, and those who completed their term were released from service with honors, free to marry, though few ever did. Some chose lives of quiet retirement. Others wielded their influence behind the scenes in politics and religion. Violation of her vow, even suspected violation, was considered treason against the gods. And unlike most Roman trials, where arguments and witnesses were weighed, the Pontifex Maximus, Rome's chief priest, acted as judge, jury, and executioner. If found guilty, a Vestal could not be killed directly. Her blood was sacred, so she would be led, veiled, and silent, to a subterranean chamber just outside the city walls, given a loaf of bread and a lamp, and buried alive, her fate sealed beneath a mound of earth. Such was the fate of Cornelia, a Vestal who was said to have wept in silence as she was entombed, proclaiming her innocence until the last. From the moment a girl, usually between the ages of 6 and 10, was chosen to become a Vestal, her identity ceased to be her own. She was plucked from patrician nobility, severed from her family, and delivered into the house of the Vestals beside the Temple of Vesta in the Roman Forum, dressed in her ritual garb, white robes and a braided hairstyle coiled beneath a veil. She would move through her mourning in contemplative silence, her primary duty to tend the sacred fire that burned within the Temple of Vesta. This flame represented the continuity of Rome, its unbroken line from past to present. It could never be allowed to go out. Should it falter, it would be seen as an omen of disaster, and the Vestal responsible could face brutal punishment. There, for the next 30 years, she would serve in phases, 10 years of learning, 10 years of performing rituals, and 10 years of teaching the next generation. Her very presence in society became sacred. To harm a Vestal, or even to disrespect her, was an act of sacrilege, punishable by death. She was, in every sense, a living symbol of Rome itself. The daily routine of a Vestal began before dawn. She would rise in the marble-clad Atrium Vesta, a serene yet guarded residence near the temple. Beyond the flame, her duties varied by season and festival. She might prepare sacred grain offerings, oversee purification rituals, guard sacred objects, including the mysterious palladium, a relic said to have been brought by Aeneas from Troy. Vestals also played a key role in public ceremonies, appearing beside consuls and emperors, their presence believed to sanctify political proceedings. They were unusually granted privileges far beyond most Roman women. The right to own property, make wills, and even pardon condemned criminals simply by touching them. But this sacred life came with a deep, unrelenting cost: chastity. Yet, not all was grim. In public, Vestals were treated with awe. Now, as your breath slows and your eyes begin to flutter with sleep, picture yourself walking the cloistered garden of the house of the Vestals. And now we ascend the final tier of Roman opulence to a world almost mythic in its excess and theatrical grandeur. The dining rooms of emperors, where food became spectacle, guests became props, and every bite was a whisper of divine power. And even a massive, rotating dining hall powered by slave labor and complex gearwork hidden in the foundations. Its walls were covered in gold leaf and mother-of-pearl. Ceilings dripped with perfumed rose petals. Fountains gurgled with scented wine. Where you were seated spoke volumes. Too far from Nero, and you were out of favor. Poets like Petronius, who served as Nero's arbiter of elegance, crafted tales of extravagant parties that blurred the lines between luxury and lunacy. Others, like Seneca, recoiled at the decadence, warning that moral decay flowed from such pleasure. But the emperor pressed on, reshaping Rome itself into his playground. He even erected a colossal bronze statue of himself as the sun god outside his palace gates, a 100-foot testament to his self-image as the source of all light, joy, and life. Too close, and you might be seen as a pawn. One false word, a failed jest, a raised eyebrow could bring about exile, or worse. As guests lifted their silver cups, they knew full well that the wine might be their last. This was not comfort, it was domination by indulgence. Even the floors were inlaid with semi-precious stones, not mosaics of color, actual slices of amethyst, carnelian, and lapis lazuli. When guests reclined here, they did so not on mere couches, but on platforms of ivory, their backs supported by cushions stuffed with swan's down. Vespasian drained the artificial lake to build the Colosseum. Cassian buried parts of it beneath his public baths. And so, the Golden House was swallowed by time and concrete. For centuries, lay forgotten, until Renaissance artists like Raphael were lowered by ropes into its sunken chambers, their torches revealing frescoes of gods, monsters, and feasts frozen in plaster. No other Roman structure captures this theatricality more vividly than the Domus Aurea, or Golden House, the palatial marvel built by Emperor Nero after the Great Fire of Rome in 64 CE. The scent of rose petals is thick in the air. A flute hums softly from behind a marble column. Dishes gleam with impossible colors. The emperor smiles, and you are not sure if you are being honored or hunted. You sip your wine and wait for the next miracle, or the next fall. Flamingo tongues, jellyfish soaked in honey and vinegar, dormice stuffed with almonds and dipped in poppy seed sauce. Dishes were arranged not for taste alone, but to astonish. Tired tables would rise through the floor, presented by silent slaves dressed as gods. Roasted boar might arrive with birds flying from its belly. Live fish might swim in glass bowls between courses. Every element, from the scent of the air to the pace of music played by hidden performers, was choreographed to overwhelm the senses. What was meant to be a residence became an embodiment of imperial fantasy, a vast complex adorned with precious stones, rotating ceilings, and banquets that seemed torn from the dreams of Dionysus. To dine in the Domus Aurea was not merely to eat, it was to witness the emperor's control over nature, its wealth, and pleasure itself. Constructed over 300 acres of the heart of Rome, Nero's Domus Aurea featured artificial lakes, groves, vineyards, and the food. Oh, the food. It was no mere sustenance. The banquet was a drama, but beneath this spectacle lay deep political theater. The emperor dined not just with senators and allies, but with potential threats, rivals, and performers of loyalty. And yet, there were those who delighted in it. The Domus Aurea did not last. After Nero's death, later emperors sought to erase its memory, exclaiming, "And now, as you begin to slip into dream, imagine lying on a couch beneath the ceiling that turns like the heavens. And now, as the night deepens and the breath of ancient incense fades from your imagination, let us close this journey not with glory, but with ruin, not the triumph of Roman splendor, but the slow, silent crumbling of its gilded walls. For every senator who reclined beside Nero, every vestal who watched the sacred flame flicker in the forum, there were others, many others, who descended into the shadows. The wealth of Rome, as vast as it was, never guaranteed permanence. And so, let us follow the quiet collapse of a Roman aristocrat, once honored, now forgotten, whose life reveals just how fragile power could be in a city that fed on spectacle. He was buried not in a marble mausoleum, but in a humble columbarium near the Appian Way, among minor officials and merchants. The empire was a machine of glory, yes, but also a grinder of men, even the best born. A cold breeze moves through the collapsed roof. Somewhere in the distance, the echoes of a lyre, half remembered, half reimagined, call you to dreams. The marble is cracked. The oil has run dry. But for a time, oh, for a time, Rome shimmered with impossible light. The fall did not always come with blood and rebellion. Sometimes it arrived like dust through a broken window, quiet, unnoticed, final. A carved inscription, now worn and cracked, reads only, "He served the state. He fell with dignity." In a city that once crowned him, the earth closed over him without fanfare. Imagine a man, Gaius Aemilius Severus, born into the ancient lineage of the gens Aemilia, his name inscribed on marble plinths. His youth filled with tutors, banquets, and whispered ambitions. As a young senator, he dined beside emperors, owned estates stretching from Campania to Carthage. His heir, a poet rather than a politician, squandered a fortune on chariot races and statuary. The atrium that once echoed with poetry now heard only silence. Letters to the emperor went unanswered, decreasing. Creditors circled like crows. Slaves were sold, tapestries pawned. One winter, Severus was forced to sell his family's ancestral rings, symbols of 100 years of civic service. just to pay for firewood and olives. And when he passed through the forum, people no longer rose. Children whispered, not in awe, but curiosity. Is that the one who used to host Saturnalia for the whole street? And then came a new emperor who dismissed half the Senate, seized land under pretense of temple construction, and invited in a new class of provincial elites, rich from war spoils and foreign trade. The old patrician names began to lose their gravity. Severus found himself further from the center, no longer consulted, no longer feared. His salutatio grew smaller each morning. Clients once loyal now bowed to new patrons, and presided over cases in the basilica with the calm of one certain of his place. His family tombs were crowned with carved lions. His villa near Tiber boasted hot and cold baths, a fish pond, and an army of slaves. But as the decades passed, the tides shifted slowly, invisibly at first, and Rome's golden age began to flicker. Severus invested in grain shipments from Egypt, only for pirates to raid the cargo. Slaves rebelled and burned part of his estate. Soon, the baths fell into disrepair. The mosaic floors cracked. The fish pond dried up. By the time he died, Severus was living in a modest apartment on the Aventine, his name absent from the games, his image forgotten in the Senate. But this, too, is Rome. Beneath the triumphal arches and golden ceilings lie the stories of decline, of whispered regrets and faded legacies. Now, as you drift deeper into rest, imagine standing in a ruined villa, vines curling around broken columns,